What if the royal baby you saw was never born the way you were told, because Meghan Markle was never pregnant? Tonight, Buckingham Palace breaks its silence in the most explosive royal revelation in years. Top aides are now exposing confidential files, claiming Meghan used a secret surrogate while staging a fake pregnancy with a prosthetic bump. No hospital records, no confirmed delivery, and a timeline so broken, even Prince Harry allegedly demanded a DNA test. In this investigation, we uncover the evidence, the motive, and the cover-up that could rewrite royal history forever. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It began with a fairy tale, a wedding watched by millions. A prince, once the most eligible bachelor in the world, stood at the altar awaiting an American actress turned duchess. The world watched as Meghan Markle, clad in white, stepped into royal history. And soon after, came the announcement that shook Buckingham Palace and sparked jubilation across the globe. The Duchess of Sussex was expecting. But what if that moment, so carefully packaged and widely celebrated, was a calculated illusion? For years, speculation has bubbled just beneath the surface. Whispers in corridors, hints in tabloid footnotes, and questions posed quietly on the internet. Was Meghan Markle ever actually pregnant with Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor? Today, those whispers are roaring. The palace, long silent and fiercely protective of its own, has finally broken the wall of secrecy. According to internal leaks and anonymous royal aides, the story the world believed about Archie's birth may have been an intricate fabrication. Not only was Meghan never admitted to the London hospital originally claimed, but new evidence suggests a secret surrogate carried the child while Meghan appeared in public with what experts are now calling an inconsistent and suspicious baby bump. This video is not about scandal for scandal's sake. It's about the lengths to which powerful institutions will go to protect their image. It's about the trust millions place in public figures and what happens when that trust is shattered. And most of all, it's about truth. Because in this case, truth has been buried beneath layers of deception, PR spin, and royal protocol. Until now. Let's rewind. When Meghan and Harry first announced they were expecting, the news was met with enthusiasm and affection. The British press ran with glowing headlines. Images of Meghan cradling her stomach appeared on the covers of magazines, shared with admiration and anticipation. Yet not everyone bought the narrative. Within weeks, a group of online sleuths, journalists, and even former medical professionals began to raise concerns that many dismissed as conspiratorial at best, malicious at worst. The first red flag? The baby bump itself. In one appearance, Meghan's stomach appeared unusually flat. Days later, it seemed prominently round. In another widely circulated video clip, her belly appeared to fold awkwardly as she bent down, something medical experts now suggest may be physically impossible in a natural pregnancy at that stage. At the time, media outlets dismissed such claims as nonsense. Today, with palace aides speaking out, those images are taking on a whole new meaning. But beyond the physical evidence lies something more damning: the lack of medical record. Portland Hospital, the private maternity clinic in London said to have hosted Meghan's delivery, now finds itself at the center of this royal firestorm. According to whistleblowers from within the hospital, professionals who worked the maternity floor during the time of Archie's supposed birth, no formal admission was ever recorded under Meghan Markle's name or royal alias. No operating room was prepped. No OB-GYNs were assigned. And most telling of all, no birth certificate was filed immediately following the event, which is highly irregular for a royal baby. These testimonies were previously sealed, buried under layers of legal protection and palace silence. But now, with the crown under increasing scrutiny, they're surfacing. And what they reveal is more shocking than anyone could have predicted. Why would Meghan and Harry orchestrate such a deception? That is the question at the heart of this entire scandal. Some insiders suggest it was about control, about presenting a perfect image of royal motherhood to protect Meghan's narrative. Others believe it was a matter of biology, with whispers that Meghan may have struggled with fertility issues or other personal concerns. But the most damning theory? That it was a political decision made not just by Meghan and Harry, but by senior palace aides who feared public backlash if the truth ever came out. We must remember, at the time of Meghan's pregnancy, the monarchy was under pressure to modernize. Public interest was waning. Young people were turning away from the crown. Meghan, biracial, charismatic, and American, represented an opportunity to rebrand the firm for a new generation. A new royal baby with her at the center wasn't just a family matter, it was a marketing move. And if a real pregnancy couldn't be guaranteed, some say a surrogate solution, hidden behind the carefully staged appearances, became the only option. But secrets, as history has shown, don't stay hidden forever. The tension surrounding Archie's birth didn't end with his arrival. From day one, the couple made decisions that broke with royal tradition. No public presentation of the newborn on the hospital steps. No clear details about his godparents. A highly edited photo released weeks after his birth, rather than the customary images provided immediately to the press. To critics, these decisions seemed strange. Now, they appear calculated. In the days that followed Archie's birth, questions continued to swirl. Why was the name on the birth certificate altered weeks after filing? Why was Meghan's name removed and replaced with her title, a move Buckingham Palace later described as dictated by the palace, while Meghan claimed it was dictated by the palace's lawyers? The public was left confused. But behind palace doors, insiders say there was chaos, a desperate scramble to maintain a lie that was growing harder to control. One former aide, who has now chosen to speak anonymously, described late-night meetings and coded conversations between royal staff members and legal teams. The focus, they said, was on protecting the narrative. The baby had to appear as Meghan's biologically and physically. There could be no room for doubt. Another insider claimed that royal press officers were specifically instructed not to entertain questions about labor details and to instead refer to the private nature of the Duchess's medical care. And yet, the inconsistencies kept piling up. Private investigators hired by independent journalists unearthed troubling gaps in public records. Photographers who followed the royals closely during that period reported strange encounters, like Meghan disappearing for days, then reappearing with a drastically different bump. One even claimed that during a tightly controlled public engagement, Meghan was quickly escorted off stage after what appeared to be a wardrobe malfunction involving the baby bump. This wasn't just about optics anymore. It was about deception. What makes this case so compelling is not just the possibility that Meghan faked a pregnancy, but the machinery that may have enabled it. The same machinery that shapes royal images, silences dissent, and projects power through tradition. If true, this isn't merely a scandal. It's a betrayal of public trust. To understand the scale of the operation, we have to consider who may have been involved. Former royal security personnel say a surrogate would have needed airtight protection, private jets, hidden clinics, non-disclosure agreements, and above all, complete silence. No one speaks without permission in the House of Windsor. The fact that anyone is speaking now is itself historic. In this documentary, we will uncover what really happened behind the palace gates. You'll hear from medical experts, legal analysts, royal biographers, and even whistleblowers who were once sworn to secrecy. We'll show you the inconsistencies in the timeline, the photos that don't make sense, and the legal documents that raise more questions than they answer. And by the end, you may find yourself questioning everything you thought you knew about one of the most famous royal births in history. Because the truth is this, something doesn't add up. And for the first time, those inside the palace are ready to admit it. What would it mean if Meghan was never pregnant? If the heir seventh in line to the throne was born not of a royal womb but through a hidden surrogate under royal supervision? What are the implications for Archie's status, for royal lineage, and for the credibility of the monarchy itself? These aren't tabloid fantasies. These are now questions being whispered in the halls of Parliament, murmured amongst senior courtiers, and dissected in headlines around the world. We are standing at the edge of a revelation the palace never wanted us to see. And this is just the beginning. From the moment Meghan Markle and Prince Harry announced they were expecting, the British press went into overdrive. It was October 2018, and the couple had just touched down in Australia for their first royal tour as husband and wife. Within hours, headlines splashed across screens and newspapers. The Duchess of Sussex was pregnant. The world responded with near-universal celebration. It was the kind of good news the royal family desperately needed at the time. But as the glow of public adoration intensified, so did the carefully controlled narrative surrounding Meghan's pregnancy. At first glance, everything seemed textbook. A radiant duchess making her rounds across the Commonwealth, smiling, holding hands with her husband, and gently cradling her stomach. She was wearing flattering maternity dresses, giving polished interviews, and appearing in public more often than most royal women in similar stages of pregnancy ever had. But it didn't take long for the public, and eventually professionals, to notice strange inconsistencies in her physical appearance. and those inconsistencies began to unravel the illusion. One of the first red flags came during her walkabout in Sydney, just days after the pregnancy was revealed. Meghan stepped out in a white sheath dress, clutching a bouquet of flowers. Cameras flashed, fans cheered, and yet, something looked off. Her midsection, which should have been barely noticeable at roughly 12 weeks, already appeared unusually pronounced. Some speculated that Meghan was further along than reported, but that theory was soon contradicted by her own statements. Still, the image sparked the first whispers. Why did her bump seem to jump ahead so rapidly? Fast forward a few weeks to an appearance at the Royal Variety performance in London. This time, Meghan wore a long black halter gown, her bump looking significantly larger. Commentators described her as glowing and maternal, but eagle-eyed watchers spotted something strange. As she exited the car, her hand moved to cradle her belly, yet the bump itself shifted unnaturally, almost like it was independent of her movement. Video slowed down and analyzed frame by frame circulated online, sparking debates and accusations. Was it simply a strange camera angle or something else? By the time Meghan entered her third trimester, speculation intensified. A now infamous video from February 2019 shows her visiting a community center. As she bends down to pick up a fallen object, her stomach appears to collapse in on itself, a visual anomaly that several OB/GYN specialists later described as medically implausible for someone in their final trimester. Some wrote it off as a fluke or a dress illusion. Others weren't convinced. This was no ordinary wardrobe glitch. What made the situation even more curious was Meghan's own public behavior. Unlike other royal mothers-to-be, Meghan consistently placed her hands on her stomach during nearly every public appearance, even during handshakes, conversations, or while seated. While many saw this as protective and affectionate, others saw it as performative. Some psychologists even weighed in, noting that constant cradling behavior, especially in public settings, could be a subconscious effort to draw attention or create a sense of ownership over something that may not feel natural. Still, the palace continued to maintain its silence. Every official photo released during this time presented Meghan in a perfectly composed image, soft lighting, flawless makeup, and a prominent bump. Not a single photo showed fatigue, swelling, or the other typical physical changes many women undergo during pregnancy. In fact, throughout the supposed 9 months, Meghan's body remained remarkably unchanged, except for her belly, which seemed to expand and contract at will. Fashion played a significant role in the construction of this illusion. Meghan often wore coats and dresses designed to emphasize or exaggerate the roundness of her abdomen. She avoided form-fitting tops that might reveal too much detail and favored outfits with strategic folds, draping, or ruching around the belly. On more than one occasion, she was spotted with what looked like padding lines visible beneath her clothing, again dismissed at the time as shadows or fabric wrinkles. But hindsight, as they say, is 20/20. Behind the scenes, the palace press team was working overtime. They carefully curated each appearance, controlled access to photographers, and limited direct interviews. Meghan herself rarely spoke in depth about the pregnancy, opting instead for vague comments about being excited or grateful. She never discussed cravings, symptoms, or other common touch points shared by pregnant women. No official due date was announced, and unlike Kate Middleton, who publicly revealed her care providers, Meghan's doctors remained unnamed. Perhaps the most conspicuous absence during this time was the lack of a formal press briefing by medical professionals. For a royal baby, especially one as historic as Archie, the first biracial member of the British royal family born into the line of succession, one would expect transparency and celebration. Instead, the Sussexes operated behind a wall of mystery. Even seasoned royal reporters noted the difference. Long-standing royal correspondents, some with decades of experience, were denied access or kept in the dark. This unusual treatment only fueled more rumors. Around this time, Meghan's pregnancy became a battlefield online. Her supporters rallied to defend her every move, often accusing critics of racism or misogyny. Meanwhile, skeptics posted side-by-side photos and freeze frames of every public appearance, pointing out irregularities that couldn't be explained away with fashion or camera angles. The palace chose not to address the growing division, furthering the perception that they were either complicit or unwilling to confront the narrative. As the supposed due date drew closer, Meghan began disappearing from public view. In early April 2019, weeks before Archie was allegedly born, Meghan was last seen at a public engagement. After that, she vanished. There were no paparazzi photos of her entering or leaving any hospital. No staff leaks. No hospital sightings. In the past, even with tight security, it was impossible for royal mothers to completely hide their movements. Not so with Meghan. Adding more weight to the deception theory were Meghan's own interviews years later, where she spoke cryptically about that period. In one sit-down, she commented, "That was a very personal journey, and there were aspects I will always keep private." She refused to elaborate. In another podcast appearance, she alluded to feeling controlled and watched, but offered no specifics about her medical care or birthing experience. In retrospect, every carefully composed image, every controlled appearance, and every vague statement now appears as part of a broader strategy. A strategy not to share joy, but to protect a story. A story that, if ever questioned, would unravel the Sussex brand and send shockwaves through the monarchy itself. This chapter in Meghan and Harry's royal journey was not just about a baby. It was about power, who has it, who shapes the narrative, and who dares to speak against it. As more insiders come forward, and as the palace starts to reveal its hand, it's becoming clear that what once appeared picture-perfect may have been smoke and mirrors all along. And the question now is no longer whether the image was real, but why it had to be faked in the first place. For the royal family, appearances have always mattered. Every detail, from wardrobe choices to the route of a carriage ride, is orchestrated with precision. But no amount of planning or tradition could prepare Buckingham Palace for what is now being whispered through the hallways of Portland Hospital, London's premier private maternity facility. The whispers have turned into murmurs, and the murmurs are threatening to become a storm. According to new testimony from insiders at the hospital, there is no official record of Meghan Markle ever having been admitted for delivery at Portland Hospital. Not under her real name. Not under any pseudonym or alias commonly used for high-profile clients. No intake forms. No nursing logs. No official obstetrician of record. And most damning of all, no digital or physical birth documentation attached to her name, Harry's, or that of their son, Archie Harrison Mountbatten-Windsor. The claims come from 3 separate former staff members. One an administrative coordinator, another a senior nurse who was present in the maternity wing throughout the entire week of Archie's supposed birth, and the third a private security liaison who handled VIP access protocols. All 3 have come forward anonymously, protected by whistleblower statutes and legal anonymity, but their accounts are strikingly consistent and deeply troubling. The administrative coordinator, who managed intake for Portland's private suites, described the moment she first heard that Meghan had allegedly given birth at the hospital. "We were shocked. None of us saw her. No alerts were issued. We always get alerts when high-profile patients arrive. It's for security, privacy, and medical protocol. But there was nothing. No sign-in. No internal code. No royal security presence. Nothing at all." She goes on to describe how other high-profile mothers, including celebrities and even minor royals, would trigger tight but traceable security procedures. You can't sneak a duchess into a hospital. There's just too much coordination required. The senior nurse provided further insight. "We had been hearing rumors from the media, but no preparations were made on our floor. No deliveries were scheduled under any royal codes. Usually, when royals are admitted, even under aliases, the system flags it. We prep a specific room. The kitchen is told. A security post is set up. None of that happened." According to her, even staff were confused. "We thought maybe she went elsewhere. But then the palace said Portland. That didn't make sense to any of us." The third source, the private security liaison, offered perhaps the most startling piece of information. "I liaised with royal protection officers for years. There was always a protocol. For Meghan, I never received any call. No sweep of the premises. No briefing. No motorcade. Nothing was logged. For someone of her status, especially with the media frenzy at their accounts are bolstered by a glaring hole in the official record. When Archie's birth certificate was finally released, nearly 2 weeks after the event, it stated that he was born at Portland Hospital. But given the absence of any confirmation from internal sources, the document now appears highly questionable. The late release alone was unusual. With other royal births, certificates were issued within a few days and immediately registered with the proper authorities. Not so with Archie. Adding to the mystery is the lack of photographic or witness evidence. When Kate Middleton gave birth to her children, she and Prince William emerged from St. Mary's Hospital just hours later for the traditional photo call. Crowds lined the streets. press stood behind barriers. Medical staff were visible. Every royal birth followed this transparent routine, until Meghan's. Instead of tradition, the Sussexes opted for privacy. The palace initially announced that Meghan was in labor, only to release a follow-up statement shortly after saying she had already given birth 8 hours earlier. That contradiction sparked confusion even at the time. Royal correspondents were outraged. They'd been stationed outside various hospitals for days with no confirmation. Then came the abrupt declaration: the baby had arrived and was resting with her family. This announcement drew sharp criticism from veteran reporters. Longtime royal correspondent Richard Palmer tweeted that the media had been played. Camilla Tominey, one of the first journalists to report on Harry and Meghan's relationship, later admitted the palace misled the press and public. But few could imagine just how deep the deception might have gone. What if the confusion wasn't just miscommunication, but deliberate misdirection? Whistleblowers say it was impossible for a birth of that magnitude to occur at Portland without the entire hospital knowing. "It's not a facility with multiple entrances where someone could be hidden," said the nurse. "We know every VIP that comes through. There was no Meghan." That's the truth. In the weeks that followed, whispers began to surface. Staff speculated that perhaps a surrogate had delivered the child in a different facility. Some suspected a private home birth elsewhere in the countryside, far from media scrutiny. Others suggested the possibility of international travel for the surrogate delivery, shielded by the royal security apparatus and aided by diplomatic anonymity. Though those theories remained unproven, the missing records and lack of witnesses gave them fuel. Adding to the suspicion was the palace's aggressive legal stance. A former hospital administrator noted that soon after Archie's birth, employees were issued internal memos warning against discussing VIP patients and reminding them of the severe penalties for violating privacy laws. "It felt like a tightening of the leash," she said. They were spooked. Something had them very nervous. Around the same time, a freelance journalist who requested access to hospital records through official channels, seeking only confirmation of royal motorcade access on the day of the birth, was threatened with legal action. According to that journalist, the response was swift and unusual. "It wasn't just a denial," he said. "It was a wall. Emails stopped. Phone calls went unreturned. I even received a warning from a contact at the royal press office telling me to be careful." That's when I knew this wasn't about privacy. It was about hiding something. If Meghan wasn't at Portland, then where was she? One report suggests she was at the couple's rented countryside retreat in Oxfordshire, out of the public eye and media range. Another suggests she may have been in Windsor, protected by the thick walls of Frogmore Cottage. A third, more dramatic theory points to a private clinic outside of the UK altogether. It's unclear. But what is increasingly obvious is that the official narrative does not hold up under scrutiny. The question then becomes, why list Portland Hospital on the birth certificate? Legal experts say it may have been a symbolic move, a way to ground the child's birth in an official location within the UK, providing legitimacy and a clear paper trail. If the child had been born elsewhere, especially in secret, the legal implications would be vast, said a barrister familiar with royal affairs. Succession rules, citizenship claims, even passport applications all require strict documentation. A British birth makes things cleaner. Cleaner on paper, perhaps. But now, as the truth begins to surface, that paper trail is unraveling. The most recent whistleblower to speak, just days before this video was recorded, claims there was an attempt to retroactively plant evidence. "They asked if we could create an archival note showing admission under a closed alias," the source said. "We refused. It would have been a legal and ethical disaster." According to this source, a senior hospital executive allegedly resigned shortly after due to undisclosed internal disputes, believed to be related to the pressure campaign. These accounts paint a picture that is no longer just suspicious, it's damning. A hospital that never received a duchess. A staff that never saw a royal baby. A system that was never activated for a patient who supposedly gave birth there. The lack of transparency is not just troubling, it's evidence of something bigger. It's clear that the story of Archie's birth was engineered with precision. Every detail was staged for maximum narrative control. But the cracks are showing. As more people speak up, the veil is lifting. And when the truth fully emerges, it may not only rewrite the history of one royal child. It could expose how far the monarchy was willing to go to protect its image, no matter the cost. Every pregnancy follows a general biological rhythm. From the moment of conception, the body begins a carefully timed series of changes, hormonal, physical, and emotional. Though every woman's pregnancy is unique, the milestones are well documented and generally observable. In the case of Meghan Markle's pregnancy with Archie, however, the timeline presented to the public does not align with what many medical experts and observers believe to be physically or logically possible. In fact, when examined closely, the dates, appearances, and events raise a serious question. Was the pregnancy timeline fabricated? Let's begin at the moment of the announcement. It was October 15, 2018. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex had just arrived in Sydney for their first international tour as a married couple. The announcement came via a short press release. Meghan was pregnant, and the baby was due in the spring of 2019. No specific month was provided. The timing seemed perfect, less than 5 months after their wedding in May, and it helped energize the royal brand as they embarked on a goodwill tour across the Commonwealth. But almost immediately, questions arose. On the day of the announcement, Meghan was seen in a fitted white dress that revealed what looked like a visible bump. Yet, if the baby was due in late April or early May, that would place her at roughly 12 weeks pregnant, barely into the second trimester, and typically far too early for such a prominent baby bump to be noticeable on a first-time mother. It was subtle, but the discrepancy was noted by experienced observers and maternity professionals alike. By November, Meghan's bump had grown dramatically. In photographs from a visit to the Royal Variety performance, it appeared significantly more rounded and pronounced than it had been just weeks earlier. Some fans speculated she was actually further along than reported. However, Meghan herself, and later, royal sources, continued to suggest a due date of late April or early May. The implication was clear. This growth was simply part of a healthy pregnancy. But for many, the changes were too dramatic to explain away. From December 2018 through February 2019, the timeline seemed to collapse on itself. On some days, Meghan appeared to be in her 7th month of pregnancy. On others, she looked barely 5 months along. A series of public engagements added fuel to the confusion. For example, on January 10th, Meghan visited SmartWorks, a London-based women's charity. Wearing a tight black dress, she appeared heavily pregnant. Yet just 1 week later, during an engagement with the Mayhew Animal Welfare Charity, she wore a coat that revealed a much smaller bump profile. These weren't just optical illusions. Many photos were taken in clear lighting, from multiple angles, and published across the globe. The inconsistency was undeniable. In mid-February 2019, Meghan flew to New York City for a surprise baby shower, hosted at the Mark Hotel and attended by high-profile friends like Serena Williams and Amal Clooney. During her stay, paparazzi captured her entering and exiting the hotel multiple times. Her bump appeared significantly larger and differently shaped than it had just 2 weeks earlier in London. More surprisingly, Meghan traveled alone, without a medical escort, and without apparent concern about the stress or risk of traveling internationally during what should have been her 3rd trimester. OB-GYNs who later reviewed the images commented on the unusual nature of the flight. One obstetrician remarked, "By the 3rd trimester, particularly past 28 weeks, most women are advised to avoid transatlantic travel. There are elevated risks of blood clots, premature labor, and discomfort." Yet Meghan made the trip with ease and somehow returned looking even more pregnant than before. She showed no signs of fatigue, swelling, or travel-induced strain. Again, not impossible, but deeply unusual. Then there's the case of the folding bump. During a visit to the Brinsworth house in December 2018, Meghan squatted slightly to greet an elderly resident. As she moved, the outline of her stomach appeared to shift unnaturally, folding inward in a way that prompted viewers to freeze the footage, analyze frames, and even consult medical animations to understand if such movement was biologically possible. The general consensus among experts was no. A late 2nd trimester or 3rd trimester pregnancy would result in a tight, rounded abdominal shape supported by amniotic fluid and a rigid uterus. The idea that the bump could fold sharply contradicted basic anatomical principles. By early April 2019, Meghan had disappeared from public view. The palace stated that she would be taking a break from public duties in preparation for the baby's arrival. This announcement came without any official due date, location of birth, or acknowledgement of attending physicians, details normally included in royal birth preparations. When Kate Middleton gave birth, these details were shared with the press weeks in advance, helping to build public excitement and trust in the process. With Meghan, that clarity never came. Instead, the media was left guessing. Was the due date in early April, late April, or early May? Why the sudden withdrawal from public life? Where was she spending her final weeks of pregnancy? No public sightings, no leaked photos, no updates. It was as though Meghan had vanished. Then came the fateful day, May 6, 2019. The palace issued a confusing pair of statements. First, it was reported that Meghan had gone into labor. Then, just over an hour later, the palace updated the public. The Duchess had already given birth to a healthy baby boy, weighing 7 pounds 3 ounces. The timing didn't add up. How could she have gone into labor and delivered a baby in less than 2 hours, without a single hospital sighting, security alert, or press presence? And then came the certificate. When Archie's birth certificate was finally made public, it listed Portland Hospital as the place of birth. Yet by that time, no one had seen Meghan enter or exit the facility. No nurses, security staff, or hospital administrators reported her presence. There were no royal vehicles parked outside, no sweeping of the premises, no window covers or blocked-off corridors. Royal protocol for such events is rigorous. With Kate, the world watched as she was escorted to the hospital under tight protection. With Meghan, there was silence and invisibility. Compounding the confusion was the fact that the certificate wasn't released until 11 days after the birth. A delay that breaks precedent and raises questions about what needed to be corrected, edited, or prepared behind the scenes. Even stranger, Meghan's name was altered on the certificate several weeks later, with her first and last name removed and replaced by her official title, Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex. This change sparked debate and contradicting explanations from both the Sussex camp and Buckingham Palace. Meghan's team insisted it was done without her consent. The palace suggested otherwise. The inconsistency deepened public suspicion. The final blow to the timeline's credibility came from within the palace itself. According to leaked notes from private staffers, the due date was allegedly moved internally 3 times between January and April. Some royal aides began preparing for a mid-April delivery, others for late April, and at least one report suggested that Meghan was never on the official medical schedule at Portland. These internal contradictions, combined with the external evidence, have convinced many that the pregnancy timeline presented to the public was nothing more than a carefully orchestrated illusion. Medical professionals now speaking on condition of anonymity say that several aspects of the pregnancy were highly unorthodox. One remarked, "It's not impossible for someone to have a fluctuating bump or an easy labor. But for all of these anomalies to exist in one case, with no corroborating medical evidence or eyewitness confirmation, that's a statistical anomaly of its own." A timeline is supposed to bring clarity. It's supposed to lay down a framework for understanding what happened and when. In Meghan Markle's case, it's done the opposite. Instead of reassuring the public, it's raised alarm bells, bells that are now ringing louder than ever. The question isn't just whether the timeline is suspicious. It's whether it was constructed with the specific intent to mislead. And if so, who helped shape it? Was it Meghan alone? Was Harry aware? Was the palace involved in its creation? Or simply a passive participant trying to avoid scandal? In the absence of concrete answers, we are left with a puzzle of mismatched dates, unusual behavior, unexplained delays, and contradictory records. The official story doesn't fit the timeline. And in royal history, when that happens, it's usually because the real story hasn't been told. The final trimester of a pregnancy, especially for a member of the royal family, is a period that typically draws heightened media scrutiny. In the weeks leading up to a royal birth, press interest reaches a fever pitch. Streets are monitored, reporters set up outside hospitals, and royal watchers dissect every sighting or photograph. But in Meghan Markle's case, a strikingly different scenario unfolded. Rather than media saturation and visibility, Meghan essentially vanished. Her absence wasn't casual, it was calculated. And now, in light of new testimonies and insider revelations, a disturbing possibility is coming to light. Meghan may not have been hiding simply for privacy, but because she was never pregnant to begin with. As April 2019 approached, the presumed due month of baby Sussex, the Duchess of Sussex stepped away from the public spotlight. It was expected she would rest and prepare for the upcoming birth. The palace offered no specifics about her location or any final scheduled engagements. Normally, royal security would heighten around such a time, especially if the royal was remaining at home. Medical teams are briefed. Emergency routes are mapped. Helicopters are made available. Yet, there were no known visible signs of these preparations at Frogmore Cottage, Meghan and Harry's residence in Windsor. No ambulances were seen parked nearby, no emergency drills were documented, and no maternity staff were reported entering or exiting the heavily guarded estate. For a couple as high-profile as the Sussexes, such an absence of security activity was not only unusual, it was unprecedented. Former royal protection officers who have spoken anonymously described this period as eerily quiet. One officer, a former member of the Royalty and Specialist Protection Branch of the Metropolitan Police, stated, "We are always on alert weeks in advance of a royal birth. We coordinate with local hospitals, route security, and ensure that the location, whether a private home or medical center, is fully secure." With Meghan, there was no such coordination. In fact, it was like she had been erased from the grid. During this period, rumors of secret travel began to emerge. An unconfirmed report suggested Meghan was spotted boarding a private jet at Farnborough Airport, a location often used by royals and elite figures for discreet travel. The aircraft was allegedly chartered for a destination in North America. The passenger manifest was sealed. The timing coincided directly with Meghan's disappearance from public view. Could she have traveled abroad during the final weeks of her supposed pregnancy? It's a move that defies medical logic and safety protocols. Unless, of course, she wasn't actually pregnant. Adding to the mystery, no reliable photos of Meghan surfaced during this time. In the digital age, it's virtually impossible for public figures of her stature to go entirely unseen. Even Princess Diana, at the height of her privacy battles, was often captured in long-lens photos or random street sightings. Meghan, on the other hand, became a ghost. A former staff member at a luxury clinic in Canada claimed anonymously that an unnamed high-profile client, who bore a striking resemblance to Meghan Markle, visited the facility during the last week of April 2019. The clinic, known for high-security medical procedures and elite clientele, allegedly reserved an entire wing for this visit. No photographs were taken. No digital records were left behind, except for one invoice allegedly marked under an obscure alias. The clinic denied comment, citing patient confidentiality, but the timeline once again raises questions. Even more peculiar was the lack of verified surveillance footage or street photography showing comings and goings from Frogmore Cottage, where Meghan was supposedly nesting. The royal family, while private, still exists under public observation. News outlets employ entire teams to monitor royal grounds. Yet for nearly 4 weeks, no one saw Meghan enter or exit her home. No delivery vans arrived. No staff reported unusual activity. It was silence. And then, suddenly, the palace declared that Meghan had gone into labor. But there was a problem. According to multiple logistics personnel at royal and private hospitals, no transport was dispatched from Frogmore Cottage to Portland Hospital on May 6, 2019. No convoys. No backdoor medical personnel. No special escorts. The road between Windsor and central London was never closed or monitored, as it typically is for sensitive royal movements. There is simply no data, visual, verbal, or digital, placing Meghan on that route on the day of the alleged birth. One transport coordinator stated, "For us, there was nothing. We always get an alert if there's a major transport move involving VIPs. We lock down routes, coordinate with security, and ensure passage." That never happened for Meghan. Some believe she never left Frogmore at all. Others believe she was never there to begin with. If Meghan was elsewhere, possibly even abroad, it would explain the complete absence of logistical and medical documentation. It would also explain the palace's sudden, confusing announcement that she had both gone into labor and given birth, all within a few hours. If no one saw her leave, if no one saw her arrive, if no one saw her at all, then the story could be rewritten however the palace desired. But why go to such lengths? Royal insiders have begun to suggest that Meghan and Harry's true motive was to maintain control of the narrative. With global attention on their every move, they knew that once doubts were raised, they would be impossible to contain. By limiting visibility, by disappearing from the public eye, they could orchestrate events behind closed doors. Whether it was a surrogate being moved under guard, or Meghan herself being hidden to avoid exposure, the decision to withdraw from public scrutiny now appears far more intentional than originally assumed. Another curious development came from within the palace staff. A former assistant claimed that during the final weeks before Archie's birth, staff were ordered to communicate using encrypted messaging systems and avoid mentioning Meghan or baby in written documents. Conversations about medical personnel, travel schedules, or hospital preparations were only conducted face-to-face, often in secure rooms without phones. This kind of secrecy is unheard of even in the royal household, where discretion is the norm. But this went far beyond caution. It bordered on paranoia. In an incident that now takes on new meaning, a security consultant leaked that a private security detail was reassigned during the first week of May to unlisted operations, believed to be tied to an undisclosed client. The reassignment coincided exactly with Archie's birth. The consultant, bound by confidentiality, declined to reveal the client's identity, but noted it involved overseas travel, restricted access, and multiple personnel changes, a massive undertaking inconsistent with an at-home delivery at Frogmore. It's worth noting that no royal insider has publicly challenged the birth location or events, and that in itself is telling. The silence speaks volumes. The truth, it seems, was hidden not just in silence, but in motion, in private flights, in back entrances, in names that never made it onto official lists. Meghan's whereabouts during her final weeks were protected with the kind of secrecy typically reserved for national security, not maternity leave. And that secrecy, combined with the absence of any physical evidence, has now created a vacuum. A vacuum the palace is no longer able to fill with simple statements or vague reassurances. If Meghan was truly not where she was said to be, the implications are enormous. It would suggest deliberate deception on a scale that could only be accomplished with palace cooperation or complete indifference. And if she was elsewhere, perhaps at a surrogate's side, or coordinating final arrangements, then the entire public presentation of her pregnancy was a carefully crafted illusion, protected by royal power and secrecy. As this story unfolds, one thing becomes clear: Meghan's final weeks were not about privacy. They were about distance, about removing herself from sight, from scrutiny, and from accountability. And now, as the evidence builds, the distance she created is finally being bridged by the voices of those who were once ordered to remain silent. The birth of a royal child is a moment etched into history. With it comes tradition, protocol, and a precise sequence of public disclosures. Birth announcements, ceremonial photo calls, medical confirmation, and, most importantly, the birth certificate. These elements aren't just symbolic. They serve as legal and historical documentation of a royal heir's entry into the world. In Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's case, however, that expected sequence didn't unfold, and when it finally did, it raised more questions than answers. At the center of the controversy, the missing birth certificate. Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor was allegedly born on May 6, 2019. That much the palace confirmed. But the issuance of his birth certificate did not occur for 11 days. Not only was this unusual, it was practically unprecedented. Historically, royal birth certificates are released within a few days of birth. When Prince George was born, his certificate was published within 3 days. For Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis, the process followed suit. Yet with Archie, a delay of over a week raised immediate suspicions. What caused the holdup? What needed to be corrected, confirmed, or covered? At first, the media accepted the delay as a sign of the Sussexes' preference for privacy. Palace officials made vague references to private medical matters and the couple's desire to enjoy parenthood without overwhelming press attention. But internally, the story was far more chaotic. According to insiders from within the Royal Communications Office, the Sussex team was in disarray. Legal advisors, PR consultants, and palace aides were reportedly at odds over how to document the birth without exposing irregularities. One aide, speaking on condition of anonymity, described the atmosphere in Kensington Palace during the days following the birth as tense, with growing panic beneath the surface. The issue, they said, wasn't just the delayed certificate. It was the content. How could the birth be legally documented if no official hospital record existed under Meghan's name? If she hadn't given birth at Portland Hospital, as claimed, then a major legal and public deception was underway. The pressure mounted as media outlets began asking questions. Where was the certificate? Why had it not been filed? Why was Portland Hospital's administration refusing to confirm Meghan's presence on the day in question? Normally, such matters are resolved quietly, but this time, silence only deepened public skepticism. Then, finally, on May 17th, the document was released. On the surface, it seemed to settle the issue. The certificate listed Meghan as the mother and Prince Harry as the father. The place of birth, Portland Hospital in Westminster. But immediately, the inconsistencies jumped out. First was the formatting. Unlike previous royal birth certificates, Archie's lacked the usual details regarding attending medical staff and specific timeframes of admission. Then came the strange designation of Meghan's occupation, Princess of the United Kingdom. While technically not incorrect, Meghan acquired the status of princess through her marriage to Prince Harry. The term had never been used on a modern royal birth certificate before. Kate Middleton's documents had listed her as Princess of the United Kingdom only in later filings, and never with such prominence. The oddity seemed designed to obscure rather than clarify. But the most jarring detail was the handling of Meghan's name. In the initial certificate, her full legal name was included, Rachel Meghan Markle. Yet just a few weeks later, a revised version was quietly filed. Meghan's name was removed entirely. In its place stood a formal title, Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex. The change sparked controversy, both publicly and privately. Meghan's representatives claimed the alteration was dictated by the palace. Buckingham Palace countered by stating it had been made at the request of the Sussexes. The conflicting narratives made headlines, and yet again, trust in the stories surrounding Archie's birth began to erode. Legal analysts weighed in on the implications of the name change. Why would Meghan's legal name be removed from a birth certificate unless it had something to do with verification of identity or potential third-party involvement? Was it possible that removing her name provided a legal loophole to obscure who had actually given birth to Archie? A retired registrar familiar with royal documentation said, "That change is highly irregular. Birth certificates are meant to be historical records. Once filed, any amendments typically follow strict legal criteria. For a name to be removed entirely and replaced with a title, it's not standard, and it raises red flags." Behind closed doors, palace officials were reportedly frustrated by the escalating scandal. One source described an emergency meeting in which senior staff debated whether to release a formal timeline of the birth or maintain silence. They knew questions would continue, the insider said. But every route seemed to lead to more exposure. If they clarified one detail, it would only create more inconsistencies elsewhere. The fear, it seems, wasn't just public embarrassment, it was potential legal exposure. If the certificate was inaccurate or misleading, and if a surrogate had in fact delivered the child, then legal questions surrounding parental identity, citizenship, and succession would inevitably follow. These were not just media concerns. They were constitutional concerns. Archie, after all, was born into the royal line, even if his parents later chose not to give him a formal title. There was also pressure from the Queen herself, according to palace sources. Reports suggest that Her Majesty was informed only hours before the birth announcement was made public, and that she had not been kept in the loop regarding hospital arrangements or medical details. This unusual departure from protocol allegedly caused tension between the monarch and her grandson. One insider stated, "The Queen was not pleased. She values structure. She values honesty." When it became clear that details were being withheld, even from her, she felt undermined. To date, no public explanation has ever been offered for why the certificate was delayed, altered, and released in the manner it was. No hospital spokesperson has confirmed or denied Meghan's presence, and no legal authority has challenged the validity of the document, though whispers persist that it could still be legally contested if concrete evidence of surrogacy ever surfaced. For the public, the certificate was supposed to be the final stamp of truth. Instead, it has become yet another symbol of suspicion and a story riddled with unanswered questions. What should have been a simple, transparent document has instead become a symbol of evasion, legal ambiguity, and quiet panic behind palace doors. In royal history, documentation is everything. It defines birthright, determines inheritance, and secures legitimacy. The handling of Archie's birth certificate violated that history's most basic principles, and whether through error, manipulation, or desperation, the palace has now found itself in the very position it tried to avoid, on the defensive, fighting to preserve a narrative that is collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. As more information emerges, it is clear that the issue of the birth certificate is not merely a clerical footnote. It is a window into a larger deception, one that, once fully revealed, may change the way the public views the Sussexes, their son, and the very institution that tried to protect them. In the carefully curated world of the British monarchy, certain matters are deemed too sensitive to speak of publicly, questions of paternity chief among them. But beneath the surface of tradition and pageantry, even the most image-conscious royal families have struggled with private doubts, secret truths, and guarded conversations that never make the headlines. And now, insiders are revealing that Prince Harry himself may have harbored doubts about the very foundation of his new family. According to confidential sources from within the royal inner circle, Prince Harry allegedly requested a private DNA test for Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor in the months following his birth. The reason? Subtle but persistent concerns that had been troubling him since shortly after Meghan's pregnancy was first announced, and which only grew stronger as the inconsistencies surrounding the birth compounded. While such a claim might sound sensational, those close to the matter say it was not impulsive nor driven by conspiracy. Rather, it was the product of quiet observations and a gnawing discomfort Harry couldn't ignore. These whispers of doubt, now backed by more than one former aide, suggest that even Harry, deeply in love and newly married, began to question the narrative around his own son's birth. According to one former staff member who worked closely with the Sussex household during the summer of 2019, Harry had begun making subtle inquiries within weeks of Archie's arrival. He wasn't angry, the staffer recalls. He was distant, conflicted. There were moments when he would just stare at the baby, as if searching for something he expected to see but couldn't find. These feelings, reportedly, were exacerbated by the secrecy surrounding the birth. Harry, who had grown up watching the transparency surrounding royal pregnancies, his own mother's, his brother's wife's, found himself at the center of a process shrouded in shadows. The private medical arrangements, the absence of hospital records, the lack of family involvement during labor, all of it left him increasingly unsettled. While Meghan maintained that privacy was necessary to protect her health and mental well-being, some within the household noted a marked change in Harry's demeanor as questions mounted. One former aide recounted overhearing a hushed conversation between Harry and a senior advisor during which Harry allegedly asked, "If I wanted to confirm something, privately, discreetly, how would that work?" The advisor reportedly deflected the question, urging him to speak directly with royal legal counsel. Harry never brought it up again, at least not publicly, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. Reports suggest that Harry eventually took matters into his own hands. According to an unnamed source in a London-based private laboratory, a request came in mid-2019 for a DNA comparison involving a high-profile individual and child. Though client names were never disclosed, the genetic samples were delivered through legal intermediaries and the results returned via private courier. The request was marked as urgent and confidential. No digital trace remains in the lab's public system. What the results revealed remains a matter of speculation. Some claim the test confirmed paternity, easing Harry's mind. Others suggest the results were inconclusive or unexpected, fueling further distance between the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. One chilling report from a former private secretary alleges that after the results arrived, Harry withdrew from several scheduled engagements and canceled an appearance without explanation. He was, according to those present, visibly shaken. Of course, the palace has never acknowledged the existence of such a test. Officially, the royal family treats the matter of paternity as settled. Archie is, and remains, the son of Prince Harry, seventh in line to the throne. But even that positioning has raised legal questions in recent months, as constitutional experts debate whether inconsistencies surrounding the birth, if proven, could impact Archie's standing within the royal hierarchy. The implications of a disputed paternity are immense. Beyond the emotional fallout, the legal ramifications could shake the very core of royal lineage. If Harry's doubts were valid, or if surrogacy played a role in the child's birth without proper documentation, Archie's claim to any hereditary title, along with his place in succession, could be challenged. Even though Meghan and Harry declined to give Archie a formal title at birth, his legal right to one exists, and such rights are tied directly to bloodline and paternity. But beyond the legal implications is something more human, more intimate. The emotional toll on Harry, should he have doubted his child's origin, cannot be overstated. For a man who lost his mother young, who has often spoken of his desire to build a stable, honest family, such doubts would have cut deep. If he questioned whether Archie was biologically his, the betrayal would not simply be Meghan's. It would be a wound inflicted on his very identity as a father and as a man. There's also the question of why he might have suspected anything in the first place. Was it physical? Did he notice features in Archie that didn't align with his own? Was it behavioral? A lack of resemblance? Or was it more subtle, the culmination of dozens of tiny inconsistencies, from the folding bump to the absence of hospital records, each piling on top of the last until doubt was no longer a whisper, but a scream? Those close to Harry say he is not the kind of man to jump to conclusions. He has always sought loyalty over drama. Yet, he is also deeply sensitive, emotional, and by his own admission, prone to spirals of anxiety when trust is broken. The idea that he could be drawn to a DNA test speaks volumes about how serious the concerns have become behind closed doors. Interestingly, Meghan's behavior during this period has also come under new scrutiny. Sources describe her as controlling access to Archie, even with members of the royal family. One member of the staff claimed that during a visit by Prince William and Kate, Meghan delayed their meeting with the baby by several hours, citing sleep schedules and overstimulation. The visit, once it did happen, was reportedly brief and strained. William was said to have left with more questions than answers. Royal observers now believe this was a strategy, not just to guard the child's privacy, but to limit direct comparisons or potential doubt. The fewer people who saw Archie up close in those crucial early months, the better, especially if there was something to hide. To this day, no direct family photos of Archie and senior royals, particularly Prince Philip and the Queen, have ever been made public. When compared to the troves of images showing Prince George and Princess Charlotte with their grandparents and great-grandparents, the absence is striking. What began as whispers within palace walls has now become a fully formed controversy with real implications. If Prince Harry did in fact order a DNA test, and if the results provided confirmation or contradiction, it represents a seismic moment within royal history. For the public, it raises urgent questions about how much of what we've seen has been real, and how much has been manufactured for the sake of image and narrative control. For Harry, the man at the center of it all, the weight of uncertainty must have been crushing. In a life where so much was already scripted and stage-managed, to face personal doubts about one's own child must have been unbearably isolating. And it might explain, in part, his eventual decision to step away from royal duties altogether. Because if the very institution meant to protect you is instead hiding truths from you, what choice do you have but to walk away? At first, it was only murmured online, a few whispers on niche forums, comments dismissed as delusional, hateful, or too conspiratorial to consider seriously. But as inconsistencies piled up, the folding baby bump, the absence of medical records, the missing hospital footage, and the altered birth certificate, an idea that once seemed impossible began to gain traction. What if Meghan Markle never gave birth to Archie at all? What if a surrogate had carried the child? And what if the entire pregnancy had been an elaborate royal performance? Surrogacy is a subject steeped in sensitivity and legal complexity, particularly when it involves royalty. In the United Kingdom, surrogacy is legal, but not without strict regulation. Contracts cannot be enforced by law, and all parental rights must be officially transferred after birth. It is a delicate, highly monitored process that rarely remains secret when involving high-profile figures. But secrecy, as we've seen, is something the royal machine excels at, especially when the stakes are generational. According to insiders now willing to speak off record, the surrogate theory wasn't simply invented by outsiders. It was a possibility that had been internally considered by some senior royal staff. As early as January 2019, several aides close to Prince Charles reportedly raised concerns over Meghan's medical timeline and the ever-changing nature of her appearance. While no formal accusation was ever made, there were enough doubts that an internal briefing was prepared by the palace's legal team outlining potential ramifications of non-traditional childbirth arrangements. The document, never meant for public consumption, focused on the implications of a child being born to a surrogate within the royal family without public disclosure. Why would the palace be preparing for such a scenario? Because the signs were already there. First, there's the matter of access. Meghan was notoriously private about her prenatal care. No doctors were publicly named. No hospital visits were confirmed. Even within the palace, very few staff had direct interaction with her during her alleged final trimester. Those who did described her as elusive, intensely guarded, and in some cases, oddly disengaged from typical pregnancy behavior. One mid-level aide remarked, "We were given strict instructions not to inquire about her health, her cravings, or her condition. It was almost as if we weren't supposed to treat her like a pregnant woman." Compare that to the experience of Kate Middleton, who, while also fiercely private, made several public appearances right up until her due dates, allowed the release of her doctors' names, and followed all royal protocol for the presentation of her children after birth. Meghan, by contrast, not only avoided the hospital steps tradition but avoided confirmation of labor entirely. Then there's the repeated and well-documented inconsistencies with her baby bump. Multiple videos, including public footage from events like the Commonwealth Day service and the Brinsworth House visit, showed her bump shifting, flattening, or folding in ways that defy anatomical norms. Experts in maternity fashion were back.